Dear students, good morning. Welcome back to the session. We are doing the chapter The Address written by Marga Minko. And before we start with the story, continue with the story, let's have a quick recap. The narrator of the story, after the World War was over, she comes to see Mrs. Starling at 46 Marconi Street. This was the address which was given to her by her mother. And she was standing at the door, and where she finds that Mrs. Starling, she pretends not to recognize her. The narrator is quite disappointed. At first, she thought that she was at the wrong address, but then she recognizes her mother's green cardigan worn by Mrs. Starling. Mrs. Starling, she expresses surprise at narrator's survival. She refuses to talk to the narrator because she fears that the girl has come to ask for her mother's belongings. The narrator goes back, she's sad, she's disappointed. And she is reminded of her mother. She thinks of her mother who had given her Mrs. Starling's address. During the war, Mrs. Starling became friendly with the narrator's mother, and she asked her to keep her valuable things in her safe custody as she might have to leave due to the war. So the narrator, as she is going back to the station, she is having recollection of all the memories. She also recalls that how she had first met Mrs. Starling when she was about to leave the next morning after her arrival in the house. She was again carrying a suitcase, and it was then that her mother had asked her to remember the address, that is Marconi Street, number 46. So now we will continue from this page. I had remembered it, but I had waited a long time to go there. Initially, after the liberation, I was absolutely not interested in all the stored stuff, and naturally, I was also rather afraid of it. Afraid of being confronted with the things that had belonged to a connection that no longer existed, which were hidden away in cupboards and boxes and waiting in vain until they were put back in their place again, which had endured all those years because they were things. Liberation here refers to liberty, getting freedom. Endured here means suffered, they waited. So the narrator, she had remembered the address, but she took long time to visit the place. After the freedom, she was on one hand not interested, and on the other hand, she was afraid too. She was afraid of getting confronted with the past memories and the connection that no longer existed. The connections were hidden in the cupboards and boxes. So the connections here refers to all those things which were kept in Mrs. Darling's house. It seemed that those memories were waiting in vain. Vain means useless, hopeless, to put them back to their places as they had suffered all these years because they were only things. But gradually everything became more normal again. Bread was getting to be a lighter color. Lighter color means bread was getting cheaper now. It was easy to earn livelihood now. There was a bed you could sleep in unthreatened, a room with a view you were more used to glancing at each day. And one day I noticed I was curious about all the possessions that must still be at that address. I wanted to see them, touch, and remember. So the narrator shares that how when the things started to become normal, and one day she got curious and she wanted to see all those things. She wanted to visit the address. She wanted to see the things that were lying in that address. She wanted to touch them. So after the first visit, we see that how the narrator, she actually decided to come to that address. So the narrator says, after my first visit in vain to Mrs. Starling's house, I decided to try a second time. Now, a girl of about 15 opened the door to me. I asked her if her mother was at home. No, she said, my mother's doing an errand. No matter, I said, I'll wait for her. So After the first meeting, which was in vain, which was not a good one, a disappointing meeting, the narrator, she decided that she would try for one more time. So she visited the address again. And this time she was welcomed by a girl of 15 years. The girl opened the door and the narrator asked her about her mother. She told her that she was outside doing some task, to which the protagonist decided that she would wait for her. I followed the girl along the passage. An old fashioned iron Hanukkah candle holder hung next to a mirror. We never used it because it was much more cumbersome than single candlestick. Won't you sit down? Asked the girl. She held open the door of the living room and I went inside past her. I stopped, horrified. I was in a room I knew and did not know. I found myself in the midst of things I did want to see again, but which oppressed me in the strange atmosphere. Or because of the tasteless way everything was arranged, because of the ugly furniture or the muggy smell that hung there. I don't know, but I scarcely dared to look around me. The girl moved a chair. I sat down and stared at the woolen tablecloth. I rubbed it. My fingers grew warm from rubbing. I followed the lines of the pattern. Somewhere on the edge there should be a burn mark that had never been repaired. My mother will be back soon, said the girl. I've already made tea for her. Will you have a cup? Thank you, the narrator said. See here, Hanukkah candle. These are special candles which are used in the time of festivals. So the next word is cumbersome. Cumbersome means which is very tiresome to handle, difficult to carry, unmanageable. So the narrator says that she followed the girl along the passage of the home, and in that passage, she saw that there was Hanukkah candle holder next to the mirror. She remembered that how they had never used it because it was unmanageable, quite cumbersome to handle. Then the girl asked the narrator to sit down and she opened the door for the living room. The narrator, she stopped there. She was disturbed. She was horrified. She was terrified as she stood there. She was standing in a room which she knew and she didn't. Here, the narrator, here the author meant that how she had imagined that how the things would be lying in that room. And that's why somewhere she was familiar that she would find her things lying in the cupboards, waiting for her to come and touch them. But when she entered the room, seeing the condition of the room, she felt horrified. She felt strange in that atmosphere, and that's why she said that I was in a room I knew I and did not know. So she says maybe this was because of the way the things were arranged there, or because of the bad, foul smell that was in the room, or the ugly furniture. But somehow she was scared to look at those things. She felt oppressed, means she felt depressed standing there in the room. She sat down on the chair which the girl pulled out for her. She looked at the woolen tablecloth that was spread over the table. She started rubbing her hand over it. Her finger felt the warmth, and as she followed the lines of the pattern, she also remembered that there was a burn mark that was never been repaired. The girl told her that her mother would be back soon and asked her if she would like to have a cup of tea, and the narrator answered her in thank you. I looked up. The girl put cups ready on the tea table. She had a broad back just like her mother. She poured tea from a white pot. All it had was a gold border on the lid. I remembered. She opened a box and took out some spoons. That's a nice box. I heard my own voice. It was strange voice, as though each sound was different in this room. Oh, you know about them? She had turned round and brought me my tea. She laughed. My mother says it is antique. We have got lots more. She pointed round the room. See for yourself. I had no need to follow her hand. I knew which things she meant. It just looked at the still life over the tea table. As a child, I had always fancied the apple on the pure plate. So the protagonist, she looked up and she saw that the girl was pouring tea in the cups which was in front of her, and she just looked like her mother. She also had a broad back just like her mother, and she was pouring tea into the teapot which had a gold border on the lid. And she opened a box and also took out some spoons from it. She complimented the girl about the box, but she felt weird hearing her own voice. She felt her own voice quite strange in that atmosphere. It was sounding different to her. And as the girl turned to give her a cup, she asked her if she knew about the box. She added that it is antique, according to her mother. And she glanced over the tea table. She remembered how she used to fancy the apple on the pure plate. Fancied mean how she had always uh, had the desire of eating apples, keeping on the pure plates. Pure plates are the kind of plates which are actually used for decoration. So she says that I had always fancied. The girl continued, we use it for everything. Once we even ate off the plates hanging there on the wall. I wanted to so much, but it wasn't anything special. I had found the burn mark on the tablecloth. The girl looked questioningly at me. The narrator says that the way the girl was excited telling her about the things, the way she was pouring the glass, the girl also informed her that how she had tried everything on those plates, but she couldn't find anything special on that. The girl had wanted to eat off that plate too, and she says that it wasn't special. And in the meantime, as they were talking, the narrator, she found the burn mark on the tablecloth, and the girl, she looked at her questioningly. She looked at her in a question that how come she knew that there was a burn mark. Yes, I said, you get so used to touching all these lovely things in the house, you hardly look at them anymore. You only notice when something is missing because it has to be repaired or because you have lent it, for example. The protagonist said that yes and told her that you are used to touching those things into your own house that you hardly notice anything. You never recognize the importance of those things in your life, and you only notice when something is missing or it needs to be repaired because you have or because you have to lend it to somebody. And when she was talking to that girl, she again found her voice to be quite unnatural. Again, I heard the unnatural sound of my voice. I went on. I remember my mother once again asked me if I would help her polish the silver. It was a very long time ago, and I was probably bored that day, or perhaps I had to stay at home because I was ill. As she had never asked me before, I asked her which silver she meant, and she replied, surprised, that it was the spoons, forks, and knives, of course. And that was the strange thing. I didn't know the cutlery we ate of every day was of silver. So the narrator, as she was talking to the girl, again she felt her voice quite strange in that atmosphere. And she shared one childhood incident that how she also did not know that all the cutlery those they were using were made of silver. So she shares that how once she had to stay at home and her mother had asked her to help her with polishing those cutlery, and it was then that she came to know that it was all made of silver. The girl laughed again. I bet you don't know it is either. I looked intently at her. So the girl started laughing when the narrator shared this incident, and the narrator also added that she was sure that the girl also did not know about this thing either, and she sternly looked at her. The girl said in surprise, "What we eat with? We eat with? Well, do you know?" She hesitated. She walked to the sideboard and wanted to open a drawer. I look, it is in here. I jumped up. I was forgetting the time. I must catch up my train. She had her hand on the drawer. Don't you want to wait for my mother? No, I must go. I walked to the door. The girl pulled the drawer open. I can find my own way, the narrator said. As I walked down the passage, I heard the jingling of spoons and forks. So the narrator says that as the girl was about to open the drawer, she was not in a state to look at those things again. So she jumped up from her seat and she just pretended that she forgot about the time. She was getting late and she had to catch the train. So the girl asked her if she did not want to wait for her mother. The protagonist still replied with a no and said that she must leave. So the girl pulled the drawer open. The narrator said that she could find her way out and she walked down the passage. And as she was leaving from the house, she heard the ringing of spoons and forks as the girl was trying to take out those spoons to check whether they were made of silver. At the corner of the road, I looked up at the nameplate. Marconi Street, it said. I had been at number 46. The address was correct, but now I did not want to remember it anymore. I wouldn't go back there because the objects that are linked in your memory with the familiar life of former times instantly lose their value when severed from them. You see them again in strange surroundings. And what should I have done with them in a small rented room where the shreds of blackout paper still hung along the windows and no more than a handful of cutlery fitted in the narrow table drawer? I resolved to forget the address. Of all the things I had to forget, that would be easiest. So, as the narrator left the house, she could hear the jingling of the spoons and forks. And now she was at the corner of the road. She again looked at the nameplate, and the nameplate read Marconi Street. She had come to that address. She had fulfilled the promise of her mother. The address was correct, but now at the moment she did not want to remember it anymore. She did not want to go back as the things in there reminded her of memories linked with the familiar life of the old times. She also felt that those things had lost the value. When you are separated from those things and you see them again in a strange environment, you feel that the attachment, the connection that was there, the importance that was there, it was all gone. She felt the same, that those things has lost their importance. She also did not want to take them back because she those things would again bring back all those painful and bad memories to her. She thought of what she would have done with the small rented room where blackout paper hung over the window and no cutlery fitted in the narrow drawer, because she knew that all these belongings would not fit in her small rented house. So she decided that she would forget about all those things. And she finally resolved, she determined herself that forgetting that address would be the easiest thing, because she had to reconcile to the present. She had to move on in her life. She understood the fact that she could not survive, she could not live in the shadow of the past, and it was important for her to move forward in her life. And thus we see that the narrator, who had made so much effort, who had taken so much pain to come to that address, who had waited for such a long time to fulfill the mother's promise, had finally resolved to forget the address. She finally decided to leave everything behind, and thus she decided that forgetting the address would be the first step, forgetting all those belongings of her mother, which were already utilized by Mrs. Darling. The things, they had lost their importance, they had lost their value, they were separated from her, and thus, when she saw them in strange surroundings, she felt that the connection was already gone. And this is where the story ends. Hope the story is clear to you. So, finally, What is the theme of this chapter? The theme we can discuss is about that how it is difficult to survive in the shadow of the past. One must reconcile with the present and move on in one's life. This chapter also deals that how war leaves the world desolate, not only on physical level but also on emotional and spiritual level. People are separated, they lose their near and dear ones, they are left alone, and thus they face the trauma physical level, not only on physical level but on emotional and spiritual level too. And thus the theme that it deals is the that it is a story of human predicament that follows war, and thus the painful past it must be forgotten. And how we see that narrator when she comes back to her old town, she's unable to forget her past. She wants to relive the old times, but on seeing her mother's belongings in strange surroundings, she resolves to forget everything connected with her past, and she is now ready to live her life anew. So, this is all about the chapter, The Address. Thank you all. Have a nice day, students.